Hey, can you guys hear me okay? Ray, it's always important if YouTube emails you. Sounds good, good. Let's give it a few minutes. I started this a little bit earlier than I had it scheduled for. So let's give it a few minutes and see who else shows up. But this is our beast for today from GearBest. And hopefully it is going to be some fun. Let's see if I can get... the chat pulled up here on the iPad. Get her done. How do you correlate YouTube and important? That is a good question. I find it works best to handle YouTube stuff while the wife is sleeping. So naps are good things for her. Or for me. Hey. Bent is here. Ray is here. Calvin. Ooh. Tourniquet's 3D Tanks or T3T? How's that? Let's see. So it looks like we've got 12 people here. Should we go ahead and start unboxing this bad boy? See what we got? For anyone that didn't get a chance to look, this is the Zonestar Z5 that was sent to me by GearBest. It is a low-cost dual extrusion single nozzle system. Theoretically, they claim that it can do mixing similar to the E3D Cyclops, but I'm more interested in just getting two colors out of it to see if we can kind of have a low-cost alternative or a bottom-of-the-barrel alternative functioning to the Prusa MMU or a palette or something similar to that. So let's use the knife and see what happens. It was packaged fairly well. I mean, it's a standard box. It survived without damage in shipment, at least on the outside. I believe there is more tape on it than anything else. And there we go. I am also waiting for the MK3. That is going to be a good one. Stripped toothpaste effect, no problem. There we go. All right, so let me swap your camera view here so you guys can see what I'm seeing looking down into the box here. So top layer, we have a layer of foam. We'll toss that off to the side. We have some sort of a paper instruction card, which actually looks to be fairly intuitive. We'll come back to this once we get everything out of the box. So I will set this aside over hither. Okay, so we have the first part that I think I'm not a huge fan of. This is the base plate, and it looks to be about 6mm or 8mm acrylic, and it does have a little bit of flex to that. So we'll set that here and come back to it. Now this was supposed to be a mostly pre-assembled kit, but I'm seeing a lot of parts here. This is an auto-leveling probe. US power cord. And the nitty-gritty. We have a package labeled A4, which looks to be cabling. We have an extruder with some dust on it. Looks to be a typical Mark 8 extruder with the tiny gear. We have the hot end assembly, it looks like. And we'll come back and open this up here in a bit. And let's see what we have inside here, how this comes out. Right, that looks to be the bulk of the printer there itself. So I'm going to set this over here for the moment, get the rest of the stuff out of here. There is a loose screw laying here. We have the power supply. It looks to be your typical Chinese power supply on an aluminum bracket with the paper underneath it. Even though it's assembled, the paper is underneath the power supply. And paper is on, of course, this side underneath the power supply again. We've got the control board there, which, while this looks like a fairly typical 2560 layout, I'm sorry, what's the word I'm looking for here? Looks like a Melzi style board, but it is a 2560. Voltage regulator, 4 MOSFETs. It looks like the power down to the power supply is pre-landed, and they're using these crimp-on connectors, which I'm not sure I like or not. I'll have to come back and revisit that. Looks like there's jumpers on the Z motor, the Z1 motor, since it probably only uses a single Z output, which is probably mirroring that over to the Z2 motor. It's pre-wired down to the power supply with a switch, which is not pushed in, presumably so that you could peel off the acrylic, but it doesn't do you a lot of good because of the acrylic on the other side, unless, of course, we just leave that on. So I'm not going to push that through just yet. We'll set that aside here too. Going to set aside the screw, take a look at the chat quick here. They had one job, right? Yep, it does look does look a lot like an MKS base, and I apologize if I'm missing any of the other chats, just trying to catch them all as they fly by. We have the LCD panel here, and another wing nut that just fell out in my hand, or T-nut, and screw. So it looks like they're just loosely putting these on there, which in a sense is good because it allows them to, I guess, verify that they have, that every nut has a matching screw and vice versa. But if they don't thread it on far enough that it doesn't fall off, it doesn't do us any good. All right, so there's our LCD panel. We'll set that aside as well. I'm going to pull. This looks like Bowden tube, end stops. That's our B2 bag and some other miscellaneous pieces. This looks like blue stuff. Set that aside down here. This looks like our second Mark 8 style extruder on a tiny little platform. These are very tight springs. Okay, we're going to set that aside as well. And we have a couple of tools here, a USB cable and a flash card. Some Allen wrenches, some nice, actually these are nice tweezers, I will give them credit for that. A flathead screwdriver and a set of flush cuts. So let's toss that over here out of the way. Let's bring this guy back over here. And I think that's all of our parts, yeah? So this was supposed to be a 10-minute assembly, but my gut tells me it's going to be a little bit more than that, but we'll see. Let's take a look here at the chat. Good morning, Jeffrey DeRusso. Paul, good morning. Both of you guys. Do I see you're there? Justin, Calvin, everyone else? Oh, hang on, Duo. Let's go back over here. Try to pull the chat up on the computer. Joe, you can go ahead and try to post your link again there. You should have the power to do that now. All right. So that is all of our pieces. Oh, it was just you adulting. Got it. Adulting is good sometimes. All right, so this is all of our pieces. I guess let's get this off of here. We'll result back to our sharp instruments of destruction. To separate that. What I kind of want to get is a visual layout of how this thing is going to go together. Well, that is wrapped nicely around that end stop switch that I don't want to break off. All right. So what I'm seeing here, since we're still on the top cam view, right? Let's take a look there. Yep, it basically has a notch. Okay, this is two pieces. It has a notch in the 20 by 40 extrusion for the y-axis. There are no eccentric spacers on here, so it is all based on the precision, I guess, of this acrylic piece down here. It looks like the Y plate is also acrylic, which I'm not a fan of. And there's not a lot of slop there, so that might be okay. Might be worth considering an upgrade on that. And second point that I'm not overly liking here are how small these adjustment screws are for the bed. Does look like our standard heat bed. At least they crimped these little flat ends on here, if that will focus, on all of the cabling for inserting into the captive screws. There's still not a lot of strain relief, but it's better than I've seen on other boards here. So that's decent. Let's set this aside for now. Let's take a look at our dust carriage here. Again, there's no eccentrics on here. So this looks like that there's two key style holes here, which is going to hold in that plate. I do like this. There is a spring-loaded adjustment screw behind the rod there. And they do have a captive bearing at the top, although it's not preloaded, so that may introduce a little bit of Z-wobble. And that is a printed part. But that remains to be seen, how smooth that is. Single Z-axis rod. Some sort of a pivoting spool holder design here. We'll come back and take a look at that later. So the general assumption is this will sit something like this on the acrylic. And I'm just kind of spacing this without seeing any of the manuals or anything yet, of course. That will span that bar and bolt to this acrylic base. So I can see that there, obviously nothing's bolted together yet, but I can see that there may be a little bit of wobble in that. What I think they really would have helped here is that if this top bar bolted to that, to basically create a coupling between those two. But we'll see how that goes without that. So, all right, let me set these back aside. I can tell right now that even with the, may go together fairly quickly, but with all the paper left on all the acrylic pieces underneath that are already installed, for example, on the LCD panel, the power supply underneath the Y-axis, in my mind, that's going to require taking all that back apart to get that out. So I think that, I guess you could theoretically get it up and running, but I don't like having paper stuck on things around things that are heating up. And that's just me, but paper burns. Let's take a look at the chat while I try to peel this here. Comparable to an assembled MK3A. Right. Yeah, Calvin, that may be something that I hit either you or Paul up for, are some sturdier plates and a way to bump that up, but I'm more interested at this point in being able to see what it can do out of the box and seeing if it's sturdy enough that we can put a recommendation on it. Because not everyone that purchases this is going to have access to people with those mills and CNCs and other fancy tools. This is the part that I hate, especially doing it on camera. So the first actual note for Zonestar would be to remove the paper on the parts that are pre-assembled. Thanks, Ray. Enjoy lunch. Bring me some. I'm hungry. Actually didn't expect this to be a very long stream. Given the fact that it's supposed to be a 10-minute assembly. I was expecting something similar to like a CR10, 4 bolts and it goes together, but we'll see how that comes along as we do this here. Let's see. I believe Chep on YouTube also reviewed a printer that had a very similar structural base to this recently, which he was told was a CR10 Mini, but I don't believe it had the dual extrusion or was the exact same model, but I think I'm going to find probably some of the similar faults that he had on his. So, you know what? I'm going to just leave that paper on there for now, just to see if we can get through this quicker since I'm going to have to break it back down to take it off everything else later anyway. Just to see this. So, okay, so we have our parts. Install screws and rubber pads to these boards. So let's bring our instructions over here, which unfortunately you guys cannot see. But so we need 5 boat type nuts and 5 M5 by 12 screws, which I'm assuming are in this B2 bag. Duo, that's correct. CR10 Mini versus the Mini 3D, and I believe this is very similar to that Mini 3D that they were told him was originally a CR10. Okay. We have rubber feet. Oh. So we do have some rubber feet that go on the bottom here. There's one at the front, one at the back. Okay. You know what, before I do that, hang on, let me step off camera here really quick and grab some, I don't have some IPA, I have some IPA wipes. Stand by for me, folks. I am prepped with prep wipes. If I'm going to stick those rubber feet on here, I want to wipe off any of that residue that may be left. Let's see if I can catch up with chat. Wow. So those edges are a bit sharp. I mean, it's laser cut on a very high power setting, and the edges are a bit sharp here. Let's use the old shirt to buff that out. Dry. Don't try this at home, kids. Okay, now we can try this again. So let's stick these, our little feetsies on here. Does look like there is a hole drilled where each of these is supposed to go. Okay, so we have them. Now we need our boat type nuts. It looks like we need 5 pieces of them. Let's pour out this whole bag here. I love the term boat type nuts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and these really are just hammer nuts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I believe that missing screw that fell out earlier goes here with a boat type nut that's not attached. So possibly I'm missing a T-nut somewhere, but I'll throw that one on there just to keep it safe. All right. So these are going to go through here. Hopefully without any cross-threading. Well, that one does not want to tighten in. Hey Jeff, good morning. Yes, can't forget the IPA beer, although it's a little early in the day for that for me. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there's a fifth one here at the front. Okay, one thing I will note is all of these screws so far have been Phillips headed screws, and looking at this toolkit that they gave us, unless this is reversible here, I'd say these are actually some nice tweezers, these glass filled fibers. They don't give us a Phillips screwdriver, unless this is, it is reversible, but that is not a number 2 Phillips. So we're going to set this guy aside and actually break out a real screwdriver when it's time to get to those later. And of course our handy dandy hex screws. And at least they give you what looks to be a genuine Play-Doh flush cuts or shear cuts. All right, so those are there, step 1. Step 2, install the main framework, which is going to be this part. Assuming it's going to be motors down in this orientation. Or it's probably easier if I do it this way. Line those up with the sides. See if those cinch. And I'm not going to over tighten these because it is on the acrylic. Okay. Hopefully that is the correct orientation. Let me look at that again. Thing going out. You know what? That is backwards. Shell's butt. The other reason not to over tighten them so that you don't break them trying to take it back out. Because, you know, picture's worth 1,000 words. Try that again. Okay, now it's facing the correct way. So now I have the long part sticking out and the servo sticking here. Before I go on to the next piece, let's take a look at this. It actually looks to be the fiber reinforced belt here, which is a plus. It's not the really shiny stuff, but it does have a lot of stretch to it. Again, there's no eccentrics on this, so they're relying a lot, and there's a lot of dust on it, mind you. They are relying a lot on the accuracy of their machining here for that. And there's, of course, a lot of dust. Now, one thing I'm not a huge fan of, I do like the way that they ran the belt. Ooh, and there's a little scratch right there on the extrusion, but that's not going to grab the wheel, so we're good. I do like the way that they ran the belt here, if you guys can see it, through the top of the extrusion to keep it kind of tight and flush inside. One thing that I don't like is on the end of this extrusion, they didn't file any of it. It's a nice clean cut on the end of the extrusion, but none of it has been deburred or anything like that. And normally if I'm building or designing a printer myself and I'm going to run a belt over that, normally I'll take a diamond file or even some fine grit sandpaper and at least round over that corner so that the nubs on the belt, the teeth on the belt, don't grab that corner as it goes back and forth and start shearing them off. But, okay, let's put that back up. So now it's to install the printing platform. Now, move that guy back up to the top. Which is right hither. Not to be confused with yonder. And that is going to go, looks to be in that orientation. So let's flip this back over. And just, oops. And that does not want to seem to be grabbing. Okay. Nope. Okay. Let's try that again. Oh, darn it. That front one does just not want to turn. That T-nut is stuck in the hole. There we go. Okay. That does it. All right, that gets us our full access here. And now my table has a lot of wobble, but you can see how much play there is in this. So it would have been nice if the Y and the XE, the upper and the lower basically, would have been connected to each other. So either via a screw, you know, here through the top down into a T-nut on the bottom to at least keep a bridge in that area, or something, or preferably all the way through, just one hole that goes all the way through and attaches down at the bottom or something. That would have been nice, but we'll see how well it works out. I mean, it's such a small print volume, it may be negligible. All right, let's check the chat here. Yes, you guys were right. It was backwards. "45 brackets on the bottom sides, etc." Yep, exactly. Some brackets could stiffen this up. Definitely, like right here, 2 brackets would definitely make a huge difference. Okay, so let's move things out of the way just a little bit so I can get back to these directions here. Next step is to install the controller board, aka this guy. At least all the wiring is done on this. I guess I'm going to go ahead and push that through because I can always get it back off. Now, one thing I'm not a fan of here, you can see it, is while these are all heat shrinked over, this piece slides in, but it doesn't latch in. It pops back out because of the thickness of the acrylic. And even though these are, you know, on soldered connections here, or I'm sorry, crimped connectors here, well, let me rephrase that. 2 of them are. The 2 that are going to the main board are on crimped connectors, the DC. All of the AC lines are very small. This looks about 16 to 18 gauge, really tiny. The wire's just tagged in there. So I don't like that, and I don't like the fact that there's not a cover for this. You would have thought if they're going to go through the trouble to actually put the switch and everything, they would have enclosed that space right there. But let's see what it presents us. So this is going to attach 2 screws on which side? So that's the front. And let me turn this around so I can reference the picture appropriately. Well, that's interesting. That doesn't seem to fit there. Oh, unless it goes in the back. There we go. Okay, that looks like it will go in that manner. Right there. So we're going to use 2 screws. And it's not telling me to use the boat nuts, but I'm going to assume it's going to use these boat nuts. I cannot tell if they are soldered or not duo without taking it apart. They're actually up there pretty well. Good morning, Average Joe. Good morning, good morning. All right, so let's take a look at getting these screws through here. We'll get these T-nuts just started. So how long are we into, I can't see the clock here. Hey, evening, Miggy Man Mike. How long are we into this 10-minute install? I don't see a run time on the iPad here. Looks like 45 minutes, huh? Lovely. Okay, so we'll line those up like that. Well, in a sense, this actually bridges what I was saying earlier about bridging those two frames. In a sense, this does. It's really hard to see, but it actually grabs the top screw on putting this bracket in, grabs the Z-rod on this side, and the lower one, the T-nut goes this way, and it grabs the bottom of the frame. Well, I guess they're technically grabbing both the same frame, so never mind. That negates my own point. Ignore me. Okay. Okay, so that goes to another minor point of annoyance here. Again, not a functional thing. Good and bad here, I guess. This does not include a fuse, by the way. It is IEC power. And if you guys can see that, IEC power and a switch, which is nice. However, comma, this is the front of the printer, which means that even though the switch is in the front, good, the IEC power cord sticks out this way also, rather than pointing that way. So I would have liked to have seen a little bit more thought go into the positioning and placement of that, either coming out the side or out the back, or something along those lines. Okay, that's step 4. Step 5, install filament feeder. Well, it looks like one of those filament feeders is already here. That's this guy. Let's see if there is a second one that goes on this side, because I'm not exactly sure where it's going to go. That's the LCD. Sorry, our extruder. Okay, so it looks like that we only have one filament arm. Rotate it and lock it. There's supposed to be a way to lock this. Interesting. Rotate it, lock it. I don't see a second screw for locking it. His table contributes to that. Oh, the wobble? Yes, this table unfortunately is not the most sturdy thing in the world. It does have a lot of wobble, but it is conveniently sized and easy to move around, so it works for that. All right, so let's see if we can figure out how the heck this thing goes together. I believe there's supposed to be 2 of these filament feeders, since it is dual extrusion, And the pictures on the web, I believe, some of them show double, other ones show one of these wings on either side, but I only see one. They hit it in the box. Yeah, Danny, I would almost agree with that. The lack of the smart design shows where the price tag starts to show. I would almost agree with that, with the exception of it almost seems like that they designed it to a price point. It's in the box. Okay, let me go look and see if I can see it in the box. Not in the box, although the missing boat nut is. Nope. Nothing else in the box. Honestly, not a big deal. I would probably, well, it is a big deal to point it out because it should be included, and that will be mentioned back to the folks at GearBest. But in reality, I will probably end up taking this off and not using it anyway, including the parallel one. My personal feeling is that when you, especially with a platform of this nature, you start to, when you add more weight to the top side, you increase the pendulum effect. So as your Z goes up, your swing with the bed and everything goes wider, and that weight just compounds it. So I actually do not like putting rolls of filament at the top of this style frame. Maybe if it was a large box frame that was really well supported, that would be one thing, but that's my preference. Okay, but I do want to at least assemble this thing so I can understand the directions for this one. I'm seeing additional screws. Oh, I see. There are these standoff looking things here. And so it looks like these go through here. Is that still on camera? Let me slide this over so you can see it. So there's this standoff. It looks like a large motherboard standoff for any of you guys that have built computers before. And just a little wing here to hold it. In all honesty, that's 8mm acrylic. And I would not put the weight of a full spool on that. I personally, it's a tiny 3mm screw holding this hex shaft on and another end. It's not wide enough for anything but a MakerBot size spool or like a Repcord size spool. It does a little bit, yes, Duo. It does help stabilize it a little bit. Not a huge amount, but it might be more too once we get, the cabling so that it's actually sitting flat. Yeah, so 2 uses in snap, if that. Again, I mean, it might be fine if you have like the Repcord size filament rolls, which is, Repcord makes the MakerBot size, the little 6-inch rolls, or however big, they're about that big and about yay thick. It might be great if you're working with something like that, but I don't think I would put a full-size spool, which is actually another point worth noticing here is that they did not include any filament with this for running a test print. Although they did put some blue tape on the bed here, which they actually folded all the way underneath. So the only way to remove it is to actually take it off. Well, that's interesting. All right, moving on. Past this, we're going to look at the extruder and display. So there's two extruders. A and B. 1 and 2. Those are going to go here and here. If I can get that into the hole. Okay, let's try the other one first then. Yes, 250 gram schools. Thank you, Do. And yes, this will get a sheet of glass on it. Okay. This isn't exactly the position I want this at, but I'm going to put it on, tighten it up, loosen it back off a little bit, and then slide it over to where I want it, I think. Like so. Throw the LCD panel on. Again, this still has the paper on it. I'm not going to bother peeling off the paper at this point because to do so, I'm going to need to completely disassemble this printer. That would not be a priority at the moment, but I personally do not like to have paper on anything near heat. All right, wow, who was it that mentioned lunch earlier? Because now I'm really hungry. Okay. So the problem that I'm having here on these T-nuts, if you can see them, is that they're actually slightly wider. These are supposed to be push in and then they swing over style T-nuts. The problem is that they're actually wider. I believe these are actually made for T extrusion, not V extrusion. So they don't necessarily want to push through that opening very well. trying to circumvent that a little bit here by sliding it in from the side, because at least I have that option here. So we'll try to get that as close to center as possible. Now let's try that again. And we'll try the secondary extruder here. Okay, and we'll take that in so it's roughly symmetrical. Give it a tighten up. Well, I think I might rotate these later because I don't like the fact that the stepper motors have this pointing up. So may come back and rotate that later. But again, that's not a functional thing. Z end stop screw and tighten the screw. Okay, so slide these over here. Z end stop screw and tighten the screw. Not a very good picture of that. Let's see if this will focus at all. X end stop and tighten the screw, Z end stop and tighten the screw. So let's find these end stops. I'm guessing this is one of them. Howdy, Keith. Good morning to you. Okay, this bundle has 1, 2, 3 steppers. Oh, maybe that's not a stepper. Okay, X, Y, Z motor. Okay, that looks to be the X end stop, I'm assuming. So, okay, I see where that goes. So that is going to go here. It looks like. And let's see if we can find these are our LCD cables. Those are our Bowden tubes. Oh, put in the hot end and tighten 3 tubes. Okay, I'm sorry. I missed that. So this is our hot end with our Bowden tubes. So there are 3 screws that go into this. And yet there are only 2 screws here. Assuming these are the proper screws. Unless those are the screws included in this bag, because it doesn't tell you which bag. Okay, well, before we put that on, let's take a look at this guy. So it is a Cyclone style 2-in heatsink single, looks like an E3D style nozzle there with a fan, if you guys can see that, that blows right on it. So I'm predicting that there's going to be some cooling problems there. And then of course a fan on the side here blowing across, which actually should work fairly adequate to cool that upper block. But let's see what happens. I'm guessing that missing screw is probably the one that I used on here. So since we're probably not going to use this thing anyway, I'm going to thread this off and make a note that that was missing. And we'll come back to that guy later. Okay, I'm going to rotate this. This is kind of cool that once you drop the screws, once you start these screws on here, it's kind of a key pattern that I believe it's called, or a keyhole pattern. So let me get these tightened up to pretty close to where they need to be. But basically it should be fairly easy to just slightly loosen these and remove the entire unit if there's a clog or any kind of a problem. So I think we're going to have some Duo, yes, I do. However, I don't want to put anything like that on at this point because I want to review it as is. If there's problems with it, then so be it. Those need to come out because not everyone is going to know to try to attempt to do that out of the box. So that should just drop right on there. Very nice and easy. Well, that's a good sign. Okay, so extruder installed. Now what I did not see here, okay, the next step is to install the PTFE tubing, connect everything to the motherboard. What is not mentioned here at all nor is it shown in the list of pre-assembled parts, is how to install actually a few different things. So it doesn't show how to install this guy. There are 3 screws here. of different lengths and 2 nuts. And this is the auto leveling probe. But there's no directions on how to install this fella. Nor are there any directions showing on how this push-in connector goes, which this is similar to the CR10 stuff. Let me open that up. It has a profile like that, and it basically, you just cut it to fit, and it pushes right into the V-slot. I'm going to set this aside, though. I'm not going to bother with it for now, because it doesn't affect functionality. And of course, it does tell us to install the PTFE tubes. So these are going to thread into the top of these, which kind of makes no sense to me, but we're going to go for what they say here. And I say this doesn't make any sense, as I would have thought that these would have been pointing out in a different direction, because your filament comes in across the front of these, or basically comes in here, which is, you know, in the way of your Z-axis before it loops back through. So there may be some improvements to that by playing with the positioning and the mounting of these extruders at a different point in time. Fortunately, because they're on T-nuts, they're easy to move. And who knows, maybe we'll replace them with Bontex or something at some point. That would kind of be a little bit overkill, but ouch, drop count 1. So all in all, I mean, there's been a few documentation errors on here, or lack of documentation. There's a few things about the design that I don't particularly care for. Again, part of that is the rigidity. I mean, don't get me wrong, my table is amplifying everything I'm doing here and all the wobbling that you see, but if this was on a good solid surface, it would still have a little bit of play, but not quite this much. But that could be fairly easily remedied with a couple of printable braces, to be honest. So all in all, I mean, we haven't powered it up yet, of course, so ultimate judgment gets reserved for then, right? And of course, to see what the prints do. So everything at this point is based on mechanical speculation and personal preferences. But I would say the quick summary of things that I did not like about the kit is the fact that they don't remove the paper from the parts that are pre-assembled, which forces you to disassemble them to be able to do so, such as the LCD panel here or the bed plate. I would have preferred if this was a metal plate down here because of the flex, rather than an aluminum plate. I'm sorry, would have preferred it was aluminum rather than an acrylic plate for that main support down there, and I would have preferred if there was a solid coupling between the X and the Y on this frame. Aside from that, I mean, it's small, so I can't complain too much about having a single Z screw. There is this, you know, this bearing here, and they do put a bearing in this, so in this printed piece here to cap that. I'm not convinced that that's not going to actually introduce more Z wobble than it transmits, but who knows. There was supposed to be a second one of these, as shown in the the pictures on the GearBest website. But again, looking at the mechanics of this, I don't know how that actually could have gone on here. And most of the pictures on there do not show that, so I'm going to call that questionable. And I don't necessarily think this is a good design to use anyway, because it only handles the smaller spools. I don't like the fact that this is left open down here with the power connection in the front. Other than that, those are my major concerns, and those are, most of those aren't anything that would impact functionality per se. I would have also preferred, I guess, if the had coiled the Bowden tubes without so much kink in it. Well, these connectors do not push in very far. I had thought these style connectors pushed in a little bit further, but they don't look to. All right. So the last piece is to figure out where this goes, and I'm guessing, based on what I'm seeing here, well, let me rephrase that. The last two things are the electronics and this, and I'm guessing that this is going to go here. There's two shorter screws. Of course, there's those two longer ones. But I think these two shorter screws are what's going to be needed in this case. I'm guessing it's in a generic bag. So let's rotate this guy so I can see this side. It is nice that they tell you where the front is. So there's two sets of holes here. So who knows which of the two is going to be needed. Let's start with the lower one, since there is a little bit of slop here, and see if that is above the height of the nozzle with it all the way up. And it's pretty close, so let's try the upper hole. It would have been nice if this was documented, because it doesn't even tell us where to connect it. Yes, I just dropped a screw, Ray. Okay, so that's going to get wired down there. So we have our X, Z, and our Y. Okay, that looks like it, except for connecting all the wires. One thing I do not know, based on what we've seen here, is where this is going to plug into on the control board. It's a 3-pin, so I'm guessing it's an end-stop connector, but it doesn't imply where. Ah, they included an extra thermistor, it looks like, and an extra 4-pin stepper cable motor. So we'll find out what those are for, maybe. Let's start lacing this up, I guess. There is a small picture here in the directions. Let's see if that will focus. Maybe not. Small connection tells me where to plug everything in, so at least we have that. There's always that. They included all these hex wrenches and haven't even used a single one of them. Yep. What they do not give you any indication of in any of this is where, how to lace your wiring. That's something we'll come back to. Something beeping. A14 and 2 hotbeds. So A14, 2 hotbed. Of course, there is the Zonestar QC Past. I am going to be curious when we power this thing up what firmware is going to be on this board and if it is locked or not, or if it's upgradable. Okay, bed connection done. Check. Let's pull this guy down and around here. We have our Y end stop and our Y motor. Which of course I can't read from this angle. Y motor. Now I'm assuming this is Y min. Min. Okay, there we go. The auto leveler goes. Wow, I need a magnifying glass for this thing. Okay, the proximity sensor goes into the Z+. There we go. And all the end stops go into the mins. Okay. Just confirming. What do we have going on here? All right. I'm not overly concerned about cleaning up. I know you guys know I am anal about wiring, but I am not overly concerned about that at the moment because I want to figure out how this guy is going to work first. Okay, there's a wire in here for a stepper connector, yet there is no stepper connector here. This is bizarre. E0 motor. Okay, I'm guessing that's generically in the bundle and is not going to be used. So this is going to be our other thermistor, which is labeled as A13. I'm on the mix about that. So they're labeling them by their analog pin numbers, A13, A14, etc., versus labeling them on the board as bed thermistor, etc. Okay, that's labeled as fan and fan 2. Fan and fan 2. Okay, this E0 is not going to be used. I'm kind of on the fence though about how I feel about them labeling it in such a manner, generically versus, you know, leaving it open like that. I guess that remains to be seen, huh? We'll see how well that works out. So far, all the wire gauging appears to be on the slim side of appropriate. Okay. I'm just going to kind of loop that over that for now. How's that? There are two motor connectors here. And this guy, which I'm not sure where it's going to. Red, black, yellow. This is Z minus. Oh, down here. Okay. Well, this is kind of really bad. Okay. X motor. X minus. Z minus. Z. Okay, that's all of them guys. Let's lace this guy up and over as well. Oh. I guess this is going to be extruder 0. I figured out why that goes like that. Because that acts as our strain relief point, sort of, for that cable. So that's going to go there. This is going to go down to Z positive. I'm going to have that fly up and over with this guy. Yes, and I am just mentally gagging at this wiring bundle, but again, I'm not going to spend any time lacing it up until after we've tested it works. Oh, hi, Kat. Good morning. 2 hours, 10 minutes. Yep. 2 hours, 10 minutes. LCD cables and the second extruder cable, I believe, are the last two here. Although I'm not sure if that extra thermistor, this extra cable that came with it, I'm not sure exactly what they're for. Guessing those are spares. It doesn't surprise me when they put out kits like this that they have extra screws or extra cabling and such in them. Simply for the fact that it's probably more cost effective to just throw in, you know, one of everything rather than to take the time to sort it out for a type A kit versus a type B kit. Oh, I'm sorry. Good evening, Kat. That's right. It is about 9:30, 9:40 in the evening there, isn't it? In that case, good evening. Our LCD cables here are the last two to go on. And I'm going to do what I normally do with these. Take a Sharpie, just to make my life easier. I'm going to put a 1 and a 2. And at the other end, I'm going to put a 1 and a 2. So that way, when I plug them in up here, Kat, welcome to the ugliest wiring on a printer ever. Two. And 1. Okay, that is the entire extent of the instructions that we get with this thing. I am hopeful that once we get into the SD card, there is something more on there, but that is the extent of what we have there. So what I am interested in doing today, there we have it. What I am interested in doing at this point is we are going to plug it in and at least see if we get magic smoke or if things move. So I'm going to rotate this like this. Plug that into there. I'm going to bend down to my handy dandy power strip on the floor. Cross your fingers. Firmware version 1, Zonestar, and it flashed through a bunch of screens that I couldn't read fast enough. That'll make somebody happy. So let me cycle this back off again. Repeater, 92.9, Zonestar. There we go. Buffers, printer ready. I think this knob is a little over pushing here, because one click seems to do about 5 things. We have an X-Home. Survey says it does kind of look like an X-axis, huh, Eddie? Okay, I'm going to manually trip the Z here because I didn't do any adjustment on that screw. And at least we know everything homes. Ta-da. So at this point, yeah, it is repeater firmware. Let's do one more thing here on it. I'm going to power cycle it, and I'm going to watch the LEDs on the board. And LED 2 gives me 2 quick flashes, which to me indicates that there is a bootloader on this board. So that means we have some variety, I believe. I'm going to go ahead and call the stream here then, because it powers up, everything moves. What I want to do before I go any further is I need to go back and check the SD card, do a little bit of research on how to actually slice for this dual extrusion to tell it to use one or the other. And I know I said I didn't want to clean up this cabling and all, but it's impeding the motion of the bed, so I do need to spend a little bit of time with some wire ties, but I don't think you guys need to necessarily watch me make origami. I also want to play with this probe and see if I can figure out how to make it work as well. So yeah, 2 hours start to finish, right? That's a long 10 minutes, but it's not a bad build. It does seem to be functioning. Again, the quick summary on the things that I didn't like out of the box, you know, that will make it into the final review. I don't like that they didn't remove the paper off the acrylic pieces that were pre-built. So now it has to be completely disassembled to remove that paper. I didn't care for the fact that there's no eccentric screws on any of the V-slot knobs, or the wheels, I'm sorry, the V-slot wheels, so there's no way to adjust for any slop, or as your wheels start to wear, there's no way to compensate for that. And I'm just listing negatives, mind you, right now. And I did feel there was a little bit of slop in this because of the way that these aren't coupled together, but that could actually probably be remedied very easy. That can be remedied probably very easy with just a couple of brackets, but again, I'm just looking at out of the box. I think I had a preference on the way that they ran the belt, that they didn't necessarily chamfer the ends of this cable. Again, not a functional thing, just attention to detail. Duo, you've been here with the beginning. Is there anything else that I'm missing that I'd said earlier that I didn't really care for? Yes, the power supply. I don't like that the IC connector is on the front and that it's still all open underneath and very easy to stick your fingers into the live AC power. If they're going to go to the trouble of putting a bracket with a plate here, I would have preferred that it was A, fused, and B, that they would have gone the extra step in putting a little printed piece right here. That being said, that's not a hard modification to try to create some sort of a cover to snap that up a little bit. And I think the only other concern was that even though some of the pictures on the GearBest link, extruder stepper routing, yes, the extruder stepper routing is a little bit wonky here, and I think that once these cables loosen up a little bit, that might improve a bit too. But the other thing was that it only included one filament holder that can hold a small 750-gram roll of filament, and I had to steal one of these screws from that to be able to make the to put the extruder on. And the extruder fan is this huge blower that blows directly down onto the hot end. Live in the same sentence as AC power, yes. Live and let live, live. I think that's it. I mean, again, it only included one of these. The pictures showed that there was one on either side, but in the reality of it, looking at the structure here, there is no way to put a second one on the other side because of the Z-brace. So I'm not sure how they intended to include it. The kit did include parts for a second one of these, other than the arm itself. So I'm a little bit curious about that, and I'm going to reach out to GearBest and see if we can get some information from them. I guess another mechanical note here I'm just now noticing is that while it has a bearing at the top here in this printed piece for the 8mm Z-axis rod, it does have a flex coupler down below, and there's no preloading on that. So it may actually increase your Z-wobble rather than reducing it. Yes, the little bed leveling nuts. Thank you, Justin. The bed leveling nuts here are super tiny. There's no room to grab them with your fingers, so that's something that will probably want to be replaced by the users. Again, it doesn't impact functionality per se, but it's nice to resolve. Back to this Z-axis though, it is a flex coupler at the bottom. They do put a bearing at the top here, but they are not preloading it and creating any kind of a rigid piece between there, which could actually increase Z-wobble, especially with this frame. And more importantly, it is only a single lead screw, yet they are not using an anti-backlash nut, which I personally think an anti-backlash is kind of important if you only have a single lead screw for your Z-axis. There's nothing to prevent this weight from pushing it down without that. Again, because I'm more experienced with other printers, you know, some of these might be personal preferences that are just mine and may or may not impact the way that this thing can work. Oh, that's interesting too. I also don't like the Z belt, or I'm sorry, the Y belt pulley here. It's basically is a bearing between two washers, similar to the Electronics Y does, and the washers, of course, shifted, and it looks like it's about to slip off. These are also acrylic pieces here and back here where the motor's attached. So those could have some problems under tension. All in all, though, I mean, our biggest thing we're looking at is, can it print MMU decently? And yeah, those are the top things off my head. Things that I do like, I really do like the semi-modular style that they're doing here with the Cyclops clone for the mixing extruder. It's 3 screws that you loosen up, and this whole module just lifts out of a key slot. I like that. It's very easy if you need to get in there and unjam it or change your Bowden tube or anything. I like that it is all V-slot, which makes it fairly modular and upgradable. And I mean, I kind of like the general design. I wish there was a little bit more thought that went into cable management on it, but that's nothing impartial. The bed design is your typical i3 bed, so I imagine this acrylic plate underneath could be replaced with aluminum if it needed to be. I don't know, since it's given that it's mixing. Oh, there we go. That's going to be a problem that I need to look at. I'm going to have to find a way to tuck that in because that was hitting the bed there. So I might need to break out an old invention there that Ray knows of, my V-spots, and maybe print a couple of V-spots to tuck that out of the way there. That's about it. I think we can call it here. I mean, it powers up. I need to learn how to make it work. So, anyone else have any other questions? In the forum? Anyone? Bueller? We'll give the chat a few seconds to catch up. I will grab a swallow of coffee. Yeah, I don't know why you're watching a Christmas movie, Eddie. I would imagine that's probably because you're trying to entertain your children so that they will allow you to focus on other things. What's a preloader? Okay, Justin, that's hard to explain. Preloader would basically mean that you put a collet on the rod. I don't have anything I can use as an example. So I've got this yardstick. I'll try to use this as an example, right? And let's just say this was going to rotate. Here, what preloading is that you have a bearing here, and it's would be easier to draw it out. You have a bearing, and then you have a collet, a lock washer, or basically a lock collet, and that bearing is in a fixed enclosure. You do the exact same thing at the other side so that you can create an amount of preloaded tension between those collets so that can't flex in the middle there, and then you put your stepper down here. And what that does is, because you have a preloaded amount of tension between those two lock collars where it's hitting those bearings, it can't wobble as much because it's locked into that position as it rotates. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, ping me offline and I can try to either get you a drawing or point you to some examples that would explain it better. But that's essentially it. You're trying to create two collets or two fixed points on that rod. If you think about it like a guitar, it's like fretting the guitar or putting a capo on a guitar and fretting it at two fixed points so that you create a fixed amount of tension on the string. You're doing the same thing to the rod. When you don't preload it like that, where you have the tension compressing it, and you constrain both ends with the bearing like that, basically everything that the printer vibrates or moves gets translated directly back into that rod. So any wobble from there is actually going to increase your Z-wobble and make it more apparent on your prints. So, yes, Kat, I don't like that the board doesn't have a protective cover either. And more importantly, I don't like that there's so little clearance between the bed and all these cabling. I wish it was just, I don't know, maybe 5 centimeters wider so that there was, a little bit more clearance here for things to go through without hitting. So, did that answer your question, Justin? I mean, does that make sense? Hopefully I'm explaining that right. If not, there's some really good write-ups on it on the Open Builds forums. They use that on their C-beam stuff. Check out the Open Builds C-beam. And the way that they do that, it's a good example of how it should be done. So, all right, guys, I am getting hungry, so we'll call it here. And I'll do some research, and we'll get this cleaned up, and we'll start looking at putting some filament through it. Thanks, everyone, for taking their time on the Sunday to spend it watching me. Kat, thanks for joining in from Germany. Or Liechtenstein, if I said that correctly. Sorry, watching chat in the camera. Anyway, Kat, thanks for joining in from over there. Thanks to everyone else here, and we'll see y'all next time.